Good evening and welcome to Rogers TV special presentation of the New Brunswick Progressive Conservative Party Leadership Debate. This debate is brought to you in partnership with the Telegraph Journal and Rogers TV. I'm your moderator, JP Lewis, and we're broadcasting live from L'École Sainte-Anne in Fredericton. Tonight's debate is an hour and a half long and will cover many of the issues facing our province. Of course, the leader will be chosen at the Progressive Conservative Convention taking place on Saturday, October 22nd, here in Fredericton. All voters must be registered with the PC Party of New Brunswick. The order of the candidates has been determined by a draw prior to coming to the stage. Joining me are the candidates, Jake Stewart, Mel Norton, Monica Barley, Jean Dubé, Mike Allen, Blaine Higgs, and Brian McDonald. Please welcome our panelists for this evening, Chris Morris, the Provincial Bureau Chief with the Telegraph Journal, and John Chillibeck, also with the Telegraph Journal. The rules of the debates are as follows. Each candidate will begin with a short introduction of themselves, limited to 30 seconds. The first candidate will then be posed a question from one of our panelists. The candidate will have a minute to respond. Each of the remaining candidates will also have a minute to provide a rebuttal response. After all candidates have commented, there will be a 2-minute moderated debate. All candidates will be expected to participate. The moderator's job, my job, will be to ensure all candidates are permitted to comment and to keep the topic on focus with the question asked. Tonight we will attempt to ask as many questions as possible during this live broadcast. As we near the end of the debate, candidates will be asked to give their closing statements. Each candidate will be given 90 seconds for their closing statements. And first, we begin with Jake Stewart.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jake Stewart from Blackfield, New Brunswick. My candidacy in this race is a direct response and action plan to status quo politics. It's what's killing New Brunswick. And what's rare is that I'm a mainstream sitting MLA in a mainstream party, and I need your support.
Mel Norton.
Thank you very much, JP, and thank you, first of all, to all of my fellow candidates and all those that have joined us tonight live and watching at home. This is an opportunity for New Brunswickers to get to know the candidates, and I'm very grateful for the chance that we've had to travel the province and get to know so many people. My background is in the community in St. John originally, but all across New Brunswick in the last number of months.
Monica Barley.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here this evening, and I'm looking forward to the discussion that we're going to have on the issues facing our province. I believe in this province. The reason I'm running for the leadership is because I believe that it can be so much better. We have tremendous things in this province with people and richness, and we have to act now. We can't continue the way it's going, and that's why I'm running for the leadership.
Jean Dubé.
Thank you very much. I want to also thank all my colleagues here tonight and people who are viewing at their home and are about to listen to positions by each candidate on their priorities for our province and to move our province forward. I certainly believe strongly that we can move our province into prosperity. It's going to take some changes, it's going to take some experience, but I certainly look forward to working with you to accomplish that. Thank you.
Mike Allen.
Thank you, and thank you to Rogers and the Telegraph Journal for tonight. My name's Mike Allen, the former Member of Parliament for Tobic-Mactaquac. I believe strongly that the province of New Brunswick can be turned around with a government that's thoughtful and common sense, that's respectful, bold, and fair, that encourages our small and medium-sized businesses, that looks to control our finances in the best interest of the public. I look forward to a good discussion tonight and exchange of ideas with my colleagues.
Blaine Higgs.
I'm Blaine Higgs. I want to be leader of our party because I know that our province can be fixed. New Brunswick has never had a premier with a business background and the skill set that I bring to the table. I also come to the job with a senior level experience in provincial government. My experience in finance was fulfilling but frustrating. We did a lot of good, but we were held back by politics first in many of the decision-making process. Our province's foundation is crumbling. All these provinces deflect from the real issues facing us. It's not about provinces, it's about a plan, a whole new approach that extends well beyond the election cycle. Thank you.
Brian McDonald.
Our province has incredible potential, yet people are losing hope. Our youth are leaving to find work. but I believe in New Brunswick, and you are watching because you believe in New Brunswick. We have the resources, we have the people, we have you, and together, with leadership and teamwork, we can turn this province around. My name is Brian McDonald, and I need your help. Please give me your support, and together we can build a better New Brunswick.
And now we'll go to John Chilliback for the first question.
If you were Premier, what sort of tax cuts would you support and would you get behind?
The first tax cut that I would look at is lowering or actually eliminating the provincial income tax portion for all small and medium-sized businesses. New Brunswick traditionally gives an upper hand or a handout to large-scale businesses and special interest groups, those very vocal. But it's the small and medium-sized businesses that really, for once, we need to protect, covet, and help in our province, because if we do that, they will expand, they will stay open, and we will start to see a private sector that's growing and one we're not paying for.
Just to add a little bit to what Jake has said, and I think we do need to look at lowering that tax on small and medium-sized businesses as quickly as we can, as much as we can. And I would also add to that, lowering taxes as much as we can in respect of especially those New Brunswickers who right now are earning amounts in New Brunswick, and we recently saw a report of folks earning in the $200,000 range who are the most heavily taxed folks in Canada, as I understand. And it seems to me that if we're going to attract the kind of people that we need in New Brunswick into high-skilled jobs like that, we also need to examine whether or not there's an opportunity to lower the income tax burden on those individuals.
It's difficult to say at this time what tax cuts specifically that I would stand behind or that I would support, because if I would be Premier, that would only occur arguably in 2 years' time. What is clear, though, is that overall, people feel that they are overly taxed, and that goes against investment here in New Brunswick. So what is resounding with individuals and corporations, small and medium-sized businesses, is that we are taxed way too much here in New Brunswick, and that is stifling growth.
Well, I believe we need to overhaul the corporate tax system totally in New Brunswick if we're going to attract new companies to our province. Also to encourage existing companies that have been loyal for many years to expand their company. But I would overhaul it and attach it to job creation. We have to be competitive and we have to be leaders in taxation to attract businesses within our own country in every province, but also in the states, in every state. So I believe we need to be real leaders if we're going to attract the businesses and develop the businesses and jobs that we need here in New Brunswick.
Mike Allen?
Two things. I agree with Jean that it's certainly important for us as a province to look at our entire corporate and personal tax system on balance. But there's two types of taxes which I think could actually help very much. Number one, we need to promote small and medium-sized businesses expanding, and one of the taxes that really discourages that is an increase in property taxes. When one of our small businesses actually expands, it's really discouraging for them to actually expand and hire people and end up having to pay more taxes. And also the tax on our high income earners, because what that's actually doing is causing some pretty perverse behaviors in terms of people are lowering their days of work or actually choosing to leave the province and actually shuttle back and forth to New Brunswick to work. Those are very discouraging taxes and they should be lowered.
You know, what I know is that we didn't need the HST. In our spending program that we had in place, the HST would not have been raised. But given the current government spending habits, I can't be sure that that is still the case. I think it is irresponsible to talk about any tax changes until we actually understand not only the competitive nature across the country, across the province, where our niche opportunities are, and say what we need most of all is stability, comparative taxation, and a tax system that is fair and equitable to keep people in the province. You do that by a full assessment of the facts and what really makes change, not something you kind of invent as you move through a campaign process.
New Brunswickers pay too much tax. We need to find a way to lower taxes so that families can afford the quality of life they deserve. We also need to ensure that our businesses can be competitive, and we have to do that through lowering taxation on our businesses. Because with lower taxes, our consumers can afford to buy, and our businesses can be competitive on the world market.
Okay, we have 3 minutes for open discussion on the issue of taxes. Does anyone want to go first?
back in the history of time, you can look at repeated governments that raise corporate tax. Next time they're in, they lower corporate tax. They lower provincial taxes or in small businesses, and next time in, they raise them. The income tax goes up, the income tax comes down. Property tax goes up, property tax comes down. We have no long-term strategy. We have just a strategy for the moment, and that's what has to change in this province. If we're going to have a sustainable growth and a sustainable path forward, we need consistency of philosophy that makes a difference.
And we need to rethink the whole tax structure. You know, I think that our current tax model is based on how much the government can get out of the average taxpayer. And we've maxed out on that. We need to look at our tax structure and what it does for New Brunswickers. We need to provide the right incentives to stimulate our economy, and we need to make sure we're not punishing people from earning too much or companies for performing too well.
Mr. Stewart?
Corporate subsidies and corporate training grants are doled out to the amount of nearly $300 million and then some every year. But we're only giving, successive governments are only giving to the large-scale businesses who only took the money because it was readily available and they couldn't achieve it from the private sector because the capital was too risky. So I think we have to look at the medium and the small businesses, eliminate that tax, let them grow, get quarterly results, and weigh the number of private sector jobs and growth we have every year.
I think that, and Jake raises a good point with the small business tax rate. I think it's important for us to look at the small business tax rate. The concern I have with the small business tax rate as opposed to something like property taxes is sometimes with these small business tax rates, just reducing them 0.5%, it can be more than offset by the property tax assessment increases we saw last year by this government. So, and even when businesses are not making money, they're still have to pay property taxes. So I think we want to really get at those taxes which discourage investment.
Now, government has to be a real partner here. Government cannot be an impediment to growth in New Brunswick, and we need to be aggressive. We need to attract business, and it's urgent. If you look at the performance in New Brunswick, we are lagging behind other provinces in Canada. Our GDP, we're second last. Listen, if we're going to attract business to this province, we need to be aggressive. We need to be leaders and lower the tax system, attach it to job growth, and we need to be partners. And I would go as far as even, reducing the red tape on top of taxation. There's too much red tape for our businesses. There's so much that we can do to better our economy here in New Brunswick.
Ms. Barley?
It seems there is clearly a consensus among the candidates within the same party that there needs to be lower taxes for all New Brunswickers because, it's clearly what the people want and it's clearly what the economy needs at this point.
Mr. Norton?
I would just pick up on one of the points that I think Blaine made it earlier, and it's correct. We should be looking certainly at the property tax system. We're the only province in Canada that has double taxation on non-owner occupied properties in New Brunswick, and it's something that there's a real opportunity to incent greater development in tax base in New Brunswick by examining the wisdom of that policy.
So a lot of consensus. Any disagreement on tax policy?
The only disagreement would be a Liberal government that would disagree with that. They believe in higher taxes.
Any other thoughts?
I think just to maybe drive home an additional thought in relation to a longer-term strategy. We can't keep recycling every time there's a new government. And there can't be such a different philosophy in our economic potential of the province every time there's a new government. So somehow we got to get over the hurdle of the great political divide and say, what is the right measure for New Brunswick? How do we sustain our growth and get on a path of continuous improvement?
Mr. Stewart?
One of the differences that I would bring to this debate is I think we need an independent ethics commission, which has a lobby registry, MLA recall, and complete disclosure of all public tenders and public contracts. So that's one thing where I think I differ from the rest of them.
Any thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with Mr. Higgs in regards to stability and consistency. You can only do that if you have essentially a big opposition or another party in which that you can strike agreement with from government to government, right? And that's difficult.
Okay, we'll go to Chris Morris for the next question, starting with Mel Norton.
Yes, Mr. Norton. Language issues are important to New Brunswickers. What would you do to make bilingualism more effective in this province?
Chris, it's something that has come up around New Brunswick. Our fortunate reality is that we are a bilingual province. It's who we are as a people, and I believe it was Richard Hatfield who made the observation that we're always going to have to work at this. It's something that we're always going to have to work with one another to understand one another. I would want to help facilitate that understanding, help that conversation back and forth, to talk about the incredible benefits and advantages to having 2 official languages, and then when you include our First Nations, 3 cultures in New Brunswick. Those are the kinds of conversations and discussions that New Brunswickers know if we have together, we can win together.
Ms. Barley?
There is no doubt that we have a very good asset in the fact that we are a bilingual province. Most New Brunswickers agree that bilingualism is a good thing in New Brunswick. There are frustrations. I believe the very first thing is to understand where each linguistic community comes from, why those frustrations exist, and what can we do to remedy them. And when we do have those discussions, we can see that there are clearly things that we can improve, and we need to act upon them.
Mr. Dubé?
Respect, tolerance, and action. You know, we've been hearing a lot of people throughout the province, you know, mobilize the linguistic issue in this province. And they're right. They're right because, quite frankly, there seems to be a lack of understanding of the legislation. The legislation is very clear. In New Brunswick, if you're unilingual English, unilingual French, or bilingual, you have a place to reach your full potential. This is home. It's home for everybody. But there's clearly a lack of understanding. What we have to do is we have to make sure that, you know, as far as education goes, it's available to everyone, immersion in every school, rural schools, that people have a chance to learn the second language. It's not available right now. We're hearing it, and I've been hearing it, you know, throughout the campaign. Yes, we're going to offer immersion, but let's make sure that we put everybody on an equal playing field. We are rich as a bilingual province, but we need to better understand it.
Mr. Allen?
I think 3 general principles that we need to keep in mind. One is service in the language of a person's choice in the province of New Brunswick. Second is that everyone has an opportunity to succeed. And third is that no one loses their job because they don't speak the other language. I think if we can keep those 3 principles in mind, I think we're going to be a lot farther ahead. And one of the things that strikes me about the debate we're having in New Brunswick on languages is while we're having this debate, technology is completely passing us by. We have simultaneous translation technology that works around the world. We have Toronto that deals in 17 languages, and we're struggling with 2. I think there's lots of opportunity for us to leverage technology to be able to solve some of the real challenges we have. And the situation I use with people is one of the most important people in your life that you communicate with is your family, and many do it with FaceTime. Why can't you do that for your driver's license?
Mr. Higgs?
You know, I agree that around the province, I think people generally look at being a bilingual province should be a great asset, and it can be, and it is. However, we've lost the fairness and common sense of it all through the implementation or through the education. And here we go again in a recycle program with the French immersion going back to grade 1. So how many times do we go round and around and expect a different result? And when do we ask the educators, what do you think we need in order to graduate a full class of students that meet a bilingual standard in this province? One that can get a job in the province, not to be retested because of it, but meets it right coming out of the gate. How do we get every child to the full potential? Do you think the educators could help in that regard? I'll bet. Do you think they were asked in this current situation with French immersion back to grade 1? I don't think so.
Mr. McDonald?
Well, I agree. We need to make sure the education system is delivering for us bilingual graduates, and that has been a struggle for over 40 years. And Blaine's absolutely right. We need to ask the educators what we're doing wrong, because we have the expertise in our system, and we need to make sure we leverage that to produce that education. And I believe it's a fundamental principle that everyone in every corner of this province has to have the ability to learn a second language. And I believe that extends to adults as well. One of the challenges is we have our focus on our secondary school system, but we really need to provide some education for adults as well. And I've heard some people talk about the opportunities to use technology. I think Mike mentioned it. You know, that's out there. And so we need to focus on our school system. We got to get that right. And we've had 40 years, and we still haven't cracked the nut there. We've got to make sure we're producing bilingual graduates, and that every New Brunswicker has access to that language education. And furthermore, we do need to make sure that adults can get access to it as well, and we can use technology to do that.
Mr. Stewart?
Our greatest failure tonight would be in trying to beat around the bush in a way to insinuate there is not a problem. There is a problem, and I'll explain it to you. Employment standards in the 70s and 80s saw becoming bilingual as an asset. Today it's a requirement. Here's where your problem sets in. The public service is the biggest employer in New Brunswick. And we've told portions of our province that they can't qualify because they're not bilingual. But what's worse, they didn't have French immersion. The Languages Act calls for the promotion of both languages. There's no better way to promote a language than to learn it. If you want to see unity in New Brunswick, you use telecollaboration, video conferencing. You've already paid for your smart boards. I put this motion on the floor in March 31st. Caracat and Blackville could learn both languages together at no cost. So what would I do as Premier? The Official Languages Office of the Commissioner has to go. It's not adding value to New Brunswick. I would replace it with an Office of Equal Opportunity where all New Brunswick children can reach their potential, their full potential, regardless of the language they speak, and that's Louis Robichaud's vision, and it's Richard Hatfield's vision. No more duplication of medical costs with technology, and the bilingual quotas for jobs must be reformed so they're regional and equitable, and that's leadership.
Okay, 5 minutes open discussion. Who would like to start? Mr. Dubé?
You know, we could even throw something out here tonight. You know, we do exchange students all the time with other countries. We could probably do exchange students within the French and English communities where, you know, English students would go into French communities to school and English students would go into to French communities. That's probably never been tried in our province, and you know, we'd have everything to gain from it. You know, I met with a company, a major company from this country who recently moved to New Brunswick, and they said the number one thing that attracted them to New Brunswick was the French and English component. And they're looking at expanding even more into New Brunswick, but it's not necessarily the bilingual component, it's the French and English accessibility. So I think we have to take a long look at that and make sure that people really understand the benefits of a bilingual province.
Ms. Barley?
One of the frustrations that it clearly exists is the fact that there are people who feel that they don't even have the opportunity to learn the other language. And because of that, they feel that they're at a disadvantage, that they can't compete fairly against their peers. And you have to recognize that when you know, we recently learned that less than half the schools, New Brunswick English schools, have access to French immersion. That's not fair. We're essentially putting people at a disadvantage. So those are clearly things that we can do to improve the situation, to make it fair for everyone. And that's one of the biggest things that I hear about across the province.
Mr. Norton?
Yes, and Monica's right about this. I recall very early on in this campaign meeting with a group of citizens in the St. George area, and they only have access to French immersion almost every other year. And there's a mother, and she has children, and she'd like to send her children to French immersion. And I think Jake has experienced the same challenge in his hometown of Blackville. They don't have access. So this is one of those things. There is a sense of frustration in the province, and a number of my colleagues have alluded to it and hit it directly on. And so we have to redouble efforts to make sure that this is a piece that ties New Brunswick together. It's something that binds. We all completely support official bilingualism. We need to stand up for it as a province, but we need to work harder to make sure that we ensure that that kind of access is there for everyone, regardless of where they live.
Mr. Higgs?
So how long have we been talking about this? It's been 40, 50 years, and we still have a language discussion that's live and well in this province. So when does common sense apply? If we're that far behind in our educational program, then maybe we should look very seriously about our implementation program and say, you know, until we catch up on the educational side, we should look real seriously about how far we can go on implementation and what makes sense in each community, all the while meeting the standards of providing the service that's needed anywhere in the province in both official languages, but not impacting communities to a point where we're hiring people from outside the province to fill jobs simply because they can't speak the language.
Mr. Allen?
I look at it with bilingualism being an umbrella in New Brunswick, and we're having some access and process issues under that umbrella. When you think about busing and the challenges that creates when you're sending multiple buses out to rural areas to pick up kids who will be going on the same bus on a hockey trip or a volleyball trip on the weekend. When you have commissionaires who lose their job, serve their country, but lose their job because the process is not right, and you have immersion programs, which everybody's talked about, but then you have our paramedics who have encountered several hundred thousands of calls at the same time with very few issues that have been raised. To me, that doesn't say that we have a major challenge. We got to tweak this and fix the process and access issues.
Mr. McDonald?
Yeah, I mean, my own personal journey with this is that I didn't grow up with French. I've learned it as an adult, and it's been a struggle. You know, it's not easy to learn a language, and so I have great sympathy for people that struggle with it. And I think we're going to find out in an hour how my French is. But I've worked on it a lot, and but I've been lucky because I've had access to resources to help me. So we need more of those resources for people around the province, so that adults can have the opportunity to learn as well. And not only that, if you know, Blaine has said, you're right. We got to perfect the school system, but we also have to. Once those people graduate, they need the resources to use that language, and they need to be encouraged to use it. And that's not a government problem. You know, I went to the public library down here, but it's the only class in town, and there's about 20 people that are in that class. There's people lining up around the hall to get into those classes. We need to encourage our communities to step up and give them some resources into the community so we can have those language conversational classes and get adults into the process as well.
You know, whether people, you know, choose to speak the other language, that's up to them. But as far as educating our children, that's government's responsibility. And to make sure that our children are receiving the very best, no matter where they live in this province. If it's rural New Brunswick, central New Brunswick, in the big cities, in French or English communities, we have to make sure as a government that we provide them with the tools so they can reach their full potential when they graduate.
Mr.
I
Stewart?
see it as another way to keep rural New Brunswick down and out. Because the Official Languages Act came into play in 1969. It was said to protect unilingual people, and it was for a better understanding, mutual respect. But how can it create harmony if our school systems never work together to learn? Like school trips and learning about the culture. Maybe somebody in Doketown would like to know what happens in Caracat in the evening. Maybe that's important. Maybe that brings our province closer together, but it takes leadership. You need a leader to face this problem. And it doesn't matter how many languages the leader speaks. What matters is the leadership skills put in place to follow this through. And I have them. The language office, and the reason it has to go, is we would be better off putting English, French, and bilingual name tags on the nurse's uniform so that nobody would have a right to complain. We don't need a watchdog on something like this. We just need to bring our province closer together. And that's where I stand on this issue.
Okay, last comment on this question?
I have to disagree with my colleague that the Official Languages Commissioner has to go, or that her office has to go, because the purpose of that office is to ensure the promotion and the respect of both linguistic communities. And I think the key thing there is both linguistic communities, to ensure that, for example, this very issue of the fact that there are communities that cannot even have the opportunity of learning the other language, that would be her job to highlight and to make recommendations to government on how we're going to resolve that issue. That's the purpose of the commissioner, that there's no reason that commissioner, that office, would have to go.
15-second rebuttal from Mr. Stewart.
There has been nothing but widespread disrespect stemming from that office over the last 2 years. And I think that any leader in New Brunswick that has integrity has earned the right to get rid of it.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next question from John Chillibeck. From Ms. Barley.
Brian Gallan's Liberal government sent a letter to all of you asking the Tories to serve on an Electoral Reform Commission. They say, the Liberals say, that none of you have answered that. Why?
I did not answer that letter because I have no standing. I'm a candidate for the leadership of the PC party of New Brunswick, and until I'm elected, I absolutely do not have a say into that debate. That debate belonged with the current opposition, which is not me.
Mr. Dubé?
Well, I received that letter when I was not even announced yet as a candidate. I was still running a business, so I didn't feel I had much obligation to answer it. I certainly find it very interesting that we all did receive a letter, but I agree with Monica that it belongs in the People's House, in the provincial legislature to debate. And elected officials are best equipped for that. They represent every part of New Brunswick, and we leave it up to the People's House to decide that.
Mr. Allen?
Well, I'm going to concur with both my former colleagues that talked about this, because I'm not even a member of the legislature. So, you know, how am I supposed to get involved in that? What committee would I sit on? I wouldn't even be sitting on that committee. But more importantly, I think a couple of things that I would like to add to that. Number one is we've traveled around the province for the past 5 months, 6 months extensively, and there hasn't been one person who's talked to me about electoral reform in New Brunswick to change the system that we have. Not one. And I think the other thing that's kind of important is this, to me, is another the Liberal government acting like we're a bunch of crows. They want to throw a shiny object out there and have us chase that around and distract New Brunswickers from the real problems they're having governing New Brunswick.
Mr. Higgs?
Well, I certainly agree. Electoral reform seems to be something thrown out there as a deflector. Being a member of the legislature, we had asked for that a guarantee that this would go to a referendum if any outcome of this. We did not get that assurance. We asked for a clear understanding of what the goals were, what we were trying to achieve, because it doesn't seem to be a problem other than one the government is trying to make. So what have we seen from other past exercises that the government has had? Basically, it is a method to achieve a means. And the means would be, how can I ensure that I have more and I have a greater chance of being elected in the future? So when that appears to be the objective, and we don't want to put it before the public as do we accept a change or not, we have some great concerns about the validity of the process.
Mr. MacDonald?
Well, you know, our institutions are not perfect. Our democratic institutions are not perfect, but they're the best in the world. And I believe we need to better use those institutions. And an example of that is the Office of the Auditor General. You know, we've seen a government now that won't fund a significant audit that needs to happen into what happened in the Atcon affair. We're seeing a government where the Auditor General has qualified the financial statements. That means that we don't even really know the truth behind what this government's spending money on. So if the current government isn't using the institutions we already have, how can you trust them to reform the system? That's a real concern for me. You know, personally, I've been sitting in the legislature for 6 years, and I've made it my mission to bring as many guests in as possible. And I know that's a small thing, but I want to reach out and engage people in the process and show them the importance of our institutions and get them involved in it. So I think that's the answer, getting people involved in our institutions.
Mr. Stewart?
It hasn't come up a lot during the campaign. There are some that worry that it's just another partisan way for the sitting Liberals to push ahead their own agenda. So like Blaine said, I have some questions on the validity of the process. As Brian said, our process is not perfect. It never has been. But one of the reasons I was reluctant to speak about this is because this actual process, the way this was handled, this convention and this entire process, we have a lot of things we have to eradicate on our own behalf, because I would have liked to see mail-in ballots for seniors or soldiers, electronic voting, and particularly young people would like to vote online. I think the convention rules are the process that progressive conservatives should be the most concerned with at present, although I do share a concern on the validity of what the government is doing.
Mr. Norton?
I would just pick up a little bit on what Mike said, and this is an example to me of a shiny object. It's something that I haven't heard a single New Brunswicker, and bear in mind, we've all touched, by this point in time, tens of thousands of New Brunswickers. It's not a priority. Jobs in the economy are the priority, and our job, especially as candidates, is to work hard to earn the trust of delegates for October 22nd.
I think you know, when we look at this, it's a shiny object that's thrown out, and I agree. But I think we have an opportunity to engage the youth as well. If you travel around and you look at people who are engaged in politics, there's a lot of gray hair, and there's a lot like me with none at all. But we need to see more youth. I'd be ready to talk about that and see how we can encourage youth to get involved in our democracy. I think there's room there for improvement.
So we have a couple minutes to talk about electoral reform. I think we should go back to John's question. So am I to assume that no one on the stage supports moving away from first past the post? Is this another issue that we have a consensus on? Mr. Allen?
Well, that's correct, and because nobody's asked me for it as part of the traveling around the province. And furthermore, we should just take a lesson from the federal Liberals. They promised in the last campaign that this last election was going to be the last one first past the post. So they got a committee together, and they're bringing in witnesses. They cannot even get any consensus on how they should approach this at all. No consensus, and it's different presentation by different people on a format that they like. So now they're backing down from their original promise to determine just exactly how they can even structure it. So let's learn a lesson from that this isn't going to be an easy thing to do, and we should be looking to either propose it in a campaign or it should be a referendum.
Ms. Barley?
No, I'm not against first past the post. Actually, I see this as a perfect example of what is wrong currently with our current system, in the sense that why people have lost confidence in the political process, because we're making an issue that is not an issue. We should be talking about the economy, about the education system, about healthcare. In our current situation, we should not be talking about electoral reform.
Mr. Higgs?
Yeah, I think this is another example of something that was invented on the campaign trail. It sounds good. You're going around the country to promise, I'm going to reform the electoral process, and so yeah, we need that. But then when you get down to it, it's just one more issue that we don't need to talk about in a time when our priorities are so much greater. So if we have a concern in this province about the economy, which we do, then let's make that a priority. If we have education, which you've already talked about, then let's make that a priority. Healthcare, let's make that a priority. But let's not invent stuff to make no different than what we see so often with a headline showing up the day after on something totally irrelevant, totally unrelated, just to deflect the story from the day before.
Mr. Norton?
I would go even just a step further and ask the question, why did the Liberal government see it necessary to put this issue out in the middle of a leadership campaign for the Progressive Conservative Party? What was the underlying motivation there? This is just an example of the current government not focusing on the real issues that New Brunswick faces, jobs and the economy and controlling our spending.
Any other thoughts? I'm guessing, Mr. Stewart?
Sure. I don't think our system is perfect, but I think one of the biggest mistakes we make in the system is by electing people that don't have the courage to make the big decisions. The big decisions that get left to the wayside, swept under the carpet for the next generation to pay for. So as far as electoral reform, I don't think it's necessary. And I have a question just like Mel has here, like why now? But at the same time, I think our system can work, but we have to elect people with integrity and courage.
Okay, we'll go to Chris Morris for the next question.
Yes, Mr. Dubé, what would you do to encourage growth in the north and rural areas of New Brunswick? Economic growth, primarily.
That's an excellent question for a guy from the north. Thank you very much for that question. But first of all, again, we talked earlier about lowering taxes, being competitive, being able to attract new business to New Brunswick, encouraging businesses here in New Brunswick to expand. You probably have some businesses in areas of New Brunswick that would expand to northern New Brunswick as well. But more to that, I would give more power to the regions as well. I would divide the province in probably 12 regions where the decisions, the powers to be, would be taken by those regions. So if you have programs for economic development, the criteria would be developed by the regions, and the approvals would be made by the regions. So that would be sent back to Cabinet. It was signed off by the people in those regions. Let's sign off and respect the people of regional New Brunswick. And that's a great way to, because it's all different. Every region is different. And when we empower people, we can get a lot of growth through that.
Mr. Allen?
I think the question on rural and north, we run into many of the same challenges because I had the opportunity to represent a largely rural federal riding for almost 10 years. And a lot of the same things, our base industries, agriculture, forestry, natural resources, and tourism. And some of the things we have to do with agriculture and forestry is move to some of the more value-add opportunities, which we do, and encourage more exports. The federal government has signed a lot of new trade deals recently over the past few years. So we need to take advantage and help businesses take advantage of those, especially Europe and Trans-Pacific Partnership. Further, we need to make sure that we just don't turn natural resource projects down just for the sake of turning them down. So that's another thing. And finally, tourism represents a tremendous opportunity. We need to market ourselves better to the 30 million people that are within an 8-hour drive of New Brunswick. We also need to encourage them to get here and demonstrate what we have, but we also have to make sure that we have the good roads to make sure they can get to our attractions.
Mr. Higgs?
Since 2008, and certainly before that, but certainly with the changes in the market at that time in the forestry sector, we've been all dumping money into the north. And you'd say, okay, so what have we achieved from that? And the only goal that's really measured is how much money we spent. Nothing to do with what did we get on that money. Well, maybe we looked at, did we get any votes for that money? So we never looked at what are the strategic assets in a community or in the region that we should be investing in. And my thought in terms of generating that is you have competitions that basically you create the criteria for investment. So government's not handing out money like Santa Claus. Government is basically saying, here's the criteria in which we'll invest in the community. And communities work to develop to meet that criteria that says, guess what, I can invest here. But the other part is that government gets a return on that investment, so they can invest somewhere else. The money works for us, the same as money works for any personal individual or for any business. So that when you invest money, you get a return on that investment when successful to invest somewhere else. You just don't create a new pot every election or every year and say, spend it. I've got money in my budget, where should I spend it now? And it doesn't matter what on. The
Mr. McDonald?
change is getting results from.
Mr. McDonald?
I think in a lot of cases, the best thing that government can do to encourage industry is just get out of the way. And that begins with the point of taxation. You know, the Gallant government has burdened the people and the businesses of New Brunswick with over $500 million in new taxation in their mandate alone. It's an incredible amount of money. And when you suck that money out of the economy, there's less money to go around, and the economy is not working as well as it should. You know, we have to cut taxes and we have to cut red tape. And that's going to make our businesses more competitive. And also we need to return some of that money to our families so they can have more purchasing power and drive the economy. And mostly, you know, the government has a role because we can encourage businesses to produce the right products that we need to get to market.
Mr. Stewart?
If you go back 10 years, you see Atcon, you see the Shippigan Credit Union, you see the Caracat Shipyard. What I've just listed costs millions and millions and millions of dollars with no benefit to the taxpayer at the moment they were achieving large sums of money. There's nothing happening there. With the North, it's simple. In Miramichi, the Northern Bypass and the Plaster Rock Renews Highway need to be taken care of and paved and done for the communities. In Miramichi, we need more forestry activity. Then you come down, you see Beldoon. They have the deepest port. You could have an additional oil refinery in Beldoon. We have so much potential in the North, but governments and successive governments have had them chase around after these low-hanging carrots, which turned into a lot of money for projects that were too risky to begin with. So the next premier of this province has to look at those resources and the key infrastructure that exists to be in northern New Brunswick.
Mr. Norton?
I'll just pick up on maybe a theme that Jake already touched on, this key infrastructure piece. And the very first thing that a government can do is actually visit and be present and accounted for in northern New Brunswick. Apparently, it's taken Opportunities New Brunswick something like 2 years just to do a tour of northern New Brunswick and understand what's there. And that's a part of New Brunswick that has mines and it has refining capacity at the Port of Beldoon, as Jake mentioned. The Port of Beldoon is one of the only 2 deep water ice-free ports that we have in New Brunswick. There are power plants, there are roads that can be upgraded. This is a part of the province, and the major infrastructure there is something we need to be talking about. Yes, blueberries and maple syrup are fine, but the backbone of New Brunswick economy is the major infrastructure that's located in northern New Brunswick.
Ms. Barley?
I grew up in a rural area, and I continue to live in a rural area. I work in a city. I know intimately how rural areas are so different from one to the other. And when you travel the north, if you spend any amount of time in the northern part of the province, you will see that one region is so different from the next, and therefore also their struggles are very different from the next. So we can't make decisions in downtown Fredericton and purport to benefit equally all of New Brunswick when really the issues are so very different from one region to the other. What really struck me incredibly is how the government doesn't seem to truly be working with those regions, with the companies in those regions, to truly help them. When I traveled and asked, I would always be told no, that the government was not, that they had to fill in these conditions and to qualify for programs that were predetermined. We have to work with the regions individually to help them.
Okay.
Monica is absolutely right on this. There is no way that a civil servant, as qualified as he or she may be in Fredericton, can possibly know what it's actually like on the ground in Beldoon or in Caracat or in Shippigan. We need to make sure that we don't have some monolithic, centralized decision-making process on economic development. We need economic development that is tailored to the region, that responds to the real needs in the region. Monica's totally right on that.
Mr. Dubé?
Even on when you talk about northern New Brunswick and the economy, you know, I was always a big champion when I was in Ottawa as a member of Parliament for decentralization of government services and sharing the wealth of the country. And we can do the same thing in New Brunswick with regards to government services as well. You know, the government has cut down on Service New Brunswick down to 4 offices. I call that Disservice New Brunswick because it should be, you know, servicing all of New Brunswick. Let's share the wealth. Let's share these offices with other regions which are struggling and create this anchor where they can build around. So that is an economy within itself. And then you can move on and give the powers back to these regions where they can recommend to government what is best for them. And not just, you hear often in regions like northern New Brunswick and elsewhere in New Brunswick which are struggling, it's always easy for Fredericton to say no. But if the powers are given to the regions, these regions will decide yes or no if these qualify. So this is where we have to go.
Mr. Higgs?
I think, when we see the political process, typically people come with a shopping list and say, well, here's what I want. It's not about growing the economy or what I can invest in to make a difference. It's more or less what can I get out of government this time around. I mean, how many times have we reshuffled the deck? Business New Brunswick, Invest NB, Opportunities New Brunswick. We create all this buzzwords around this time it'll be different. But the one thing we do consistently is throw out what the last one ever accomplished. And I'm sure every one of those accomplished something that would be worth carrying on. But we don't even look. We just throw it out and start again. So how do we ever expect to get any continuity or development in any region of the province if we don't have people that really are well-versed, well-knowledged in the niche opportunities and helping us continuously to look for that, not just every election cycle?
Mr. Allen?
2 points I'd like to make, and picking up on one that Monica made. Some of these businesses in our rural areas are experiencing labor shortages. And in the Northwest New Brunswick is one, and our trucking industry as a whole in New Brunswick significantly. So we're trying to bring in resources to fill those. Companies want to grow and they want to put more trucks on the road, but they can't find the drivers. And the second thing I would just point out is our rural roads. I don't know if anybody's driven on them lately, but they're not that great. And I think there's an opportunity for us to develop a long-term road maintenance program that gives the contractors some specific ahead view as to what's going to happen and pledge those assets to do 1,200 to 1,500 kilometers of road every year.
Mr. McDonald?
Yeah, I said at the beginning that I think the best thing government can do is get out of the way, and I believe that. But there are some strategic things we can do. New Brunswick is in a strategic location, and we have access to some great markets. And one of the things the government needs to do is help our manufacturers and our traditional sectors and our service sectors get their products to market. The other thing that we have to do is make sure that when that product gets there, it's competitive. And we do that through lowering taxes. And we have to make sure it's the right product. So we have to make sure our sectors are producing the products that these markets are going to need. So there is a role of government. It is making sure people get to market, making sure they're competitive when they're there, and making sure they're selling the right thing to the right person.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next question from John.
New Brunswick's had a doctor shortage for an awful long time. How do we finally end this shortage?
Well, I think we had a little bit of that recipe here a few weeks ago when it was published in the Telegraph Journal about the ability of the foundation in St. John, which is actually working with graduates and actually providing them incentives when they sign to come back to New Brunswick. So one of the things that they said to Victor Boudreau is we don't need to put $12 million into this. If you give us $4 million of seed capital, we'll actually bring these doctors back to New Brunswick and sign them up. So I think that's one thing we can do is let's work with those sectors. $1 million over 4 years would have helped us solve that problem. The second thing that I would be promoting is that we actually should eliminate the billing number restrictions in New Brunswick. When small communities and others go out to actually retain doctors and they can actually get them to come to New Brunswick, we shouldn't hold them up because they can't get a billing number.
Mr. Higgs?
Well, I think it's, once again, you look at the service delivery model, you look at per capita in the province, we have just about as many doctors as any province. So why do we have 50,000 patients that don't have doctors? Why do we really have a shortage? And that doesn't mean geographically there aren't areas that do have shortages, but when you look at the disparity between, let's say, a fee-for-service doctor and a salary doctor, it's about a third. The patient load's about a third of a salary doctor would see versus a fee-for-service. So when you look at the whole spectrum of managing the system, you say, do we have the right resources? Do we have the right oversight in how we're applying those resources? So first you look at where are we doing the job right? Where are we making success? Where are people being part of the solution? And then, do we need more? Or do we need just to create more opportunities for the people we already have? I agree with the billing number thing. I think that we should be looking at getting rid of that. But let's understand what that means to every part of the province, and let's open it up. But I don't think that's a solution. The only solution, I should say.
Mr. McDonald?
Well, thanks. Healthcare is one of my passions, and it's one of the reasons I'm in this race. Healthcare is half of the provincial budget. It's about $4 billion a year. And it's really the most significant thing that the provincial government does for its citizens, is provide that healthcare. And I believe that we can find ways to make that system better, to provide better care for New Brunswickers and to reinvest in that system. Now, doctors are always going to be at the core of healthcare, but my mother, who's here tonight, is a community health nurse, and she taught me from a young age the importance of providing care in the community. And we need to make sure that we employ all of our medical professionals up to their full scope of practice. And that means registered nurses, nurse practitioners, right on down the chain to opticians and opticians as well. People that can provide better service, and we need to empower them and delegate that authority down so they can serve people better. We need community-focused healthcare, and I think that that's possible. It's the care that New Brunswickers want, it's the care they deserve, and it's the care that we can afford.
Mr. Stewart?
The fix for this one is surprisingly easy. If you take primary care, patient-focused care, and a wellness model and place that into the communities, in particular the small rural communities, you automatically get rid of the shortage of doctors, and here's how you do it. A lot of these clinics have general practitioners. They have no evening hours, no weekend hours, no walk-in clinics. So the flow of traffic in that area, if you don't have a doctor, you're largely spent your time driving to the major centers, which clogs up the waiting rooms and increased wait times. So if you empower nurse practitioners to work as a combination with the general practitioners, they can take the patient follow-ups, the overflow of extra patients or additional patients. They could even follow up on the blood work, which enables the GP to actually focus on more patients. And then you can take it a step further. You can empower your paramedics to always have trauma care training as well as advanced care paramedic training. And you can empower your pharmaceutical and your pharmacists. They could deal with the common ailments, and they can even have private consultations and the blood work clinics themselves. So once you put things back into the communities, you lessen the traffic to the big center, which is the most expensive way to pay for health care.
Mr. Norton?
The premise of the question is that we don't have enough physicians in New Brunswick, and I don't accept that premise. Really what we're talking about, and what I've heard from a number of my colleagues, is it's a question of access to physicians. And so it's working not only with the medical community, but it's also working with those primary care providers that Jake mentioned, the pharmacists, the nurse practitioners, the paramedics. Those are the folks that can provide that additional layer of coverage. If we're going to retain those physicians, because I think there is a more serious issue around retention, then we're going to have to get serious about tax reform. These are highly trained folks that can go anywhere in Canada. And if we're going to tax them to death, they are not going to stay in New Brunswick.
Ms. Barley?
During this campaign, I had the opportunity to meet a lot of healthcare professionals, whether it be doctors or nurses, and the reality is that we have to manage all of them and the resources better. You have to manage healthcare a lot better than what we're doing. And again, as we mentioned about the regions, how they're so different, the challenges or the requirements are so different from region to region. If you speak to doctors in Sainte-Anne, their concerns, their issues are so very different than if you speak to doctors in Moncton. And so we really have to work with them who have the knowledge, who will really be able to tell you how to make things work better, and truly work towards action and stop talking like we seem to incessantly do about many things.
Mr. Dubé?
Geographical distribution of doctors. We have enough doctors in this country for a population of 200 million people. So in New Brunswick, the same thing. It's the distribution of our doctors. You know, if we need to encourage doctors to go to every region of New Brunswick. Rural New Brunswick are having a hard time to attract doctors. In the cities, less. But you know, we need to focus on that. We need to open up the clinics, the medical clinics, to give access to primary medical care. As far as secondary and tertiary care, we got to get out of this bubble we're in. Every single hospital in New Brunswick is operating in a bubble. Let's open this up to New Brunswick. All of the hospitals open it up to New Brunswick. So if you have a waiting time in a certain hospital and not in another, we'll move the physician and the team to that hospital to reduce the wait time for the patient. Because at the end of the day, it's the patient that matters. You don't want to be waiting 2, 3, 4 years for a surgery. We can do it in New Brunswick if we do it right.
So we have 2.5 minutes for open discussion on healthcare. Mr. Higgs?
Operational service delivery is something I spent my career doing. So whether it be in the health sector, education, transportation, as I was in, It's about giving better services every day with the money that's available to you. It's not about I'll just charge more, I'll just raise taxes as the government, and then I'll do better, because that's proven not to be the case. Over and over again, governments have raised taxes and service delivery hasn't improved. The whole management of the system, anywhere that I was able to look, I've found areas that were huge opportunities. I would say there's about a 10% waste in government. Now that amounts to $800 million a year. And that's like, this fruit is not low-hanging, it's laying on the floor. There's not a soul that doesn't say government wastes money. I've seen it firsthand, and I know where we can get it. It's better service, utilizing people in the system that want to be part of a success story. We just need to lead the way, and I believe I can do that.
Mr. Allen?
Yeah, I'd just like to point out, pick up on something Jean said, because the distribution of the doctors is important, because when you look at attracting and retaining doctors, that's why I say getting to the communities is important, but the initiatives to actually decrease the requirement of the number of doctors is important. But you have in some of these small communities, you have doctors that are doing 4,000 and 5,000 patients, and they're getting to the 65, 70-year-old time frame. What's going to happen then? Because a lot of the doctors that are coming out of our system aren't interested in that kind of workload. So we got to prepare for the future and make sure that we handle both in terms of the services, but also attract and retain when we need to.
Mr. Stewart?
We have to tear down the barriers as to what these medical professionals are actually doing. We have to empower them and give them more responsibilities. If you live in Blackville and one of the GPs in that clinic is not your doctor, you're automatically going to Chatham for everything that you need, which is the most expensive way, and that's a small example. But if you take the nurse practitioners and they work in a true partnership with the general practitioner, and you have your blood drawing facilities and your common ailments dealt with at the pharmacy, you've cut down a significant number of traffic into the bigger hospitals. So we have to start by breaking down the barriers and looking at a team-based execution model where medical professionals work together to get the job done.
Mr. McDonald?
I completely agree, and I think that we can even take that a step further. You know, I really am impressed with what nurse practitioners offer us, and I think there's an incredible opportunity for them to do independent practice. And I would extend that also to our nursing home system. You know, I think that we've talked about the ability to empower the people that are in our system, and I think that our nursing homes can become community centers of excellence for this healthcare we're talking about. Care for the aging is certainly an issue that we all see as is very important in the future. And if we can provide more of this community-based care with our nursing homes and our hospitals providing extramural care, walk-in clinics, so that people get the kind of care they need at a cheaper rate for the government, I think that's a win-win.
Mr. Norton?
And Brian has picked up on something that I believe New Brunswick is the only province in Canada that doesn't have the nursing homes in our province within the overall healthcare framework. That's something that has to be looked at if we're going to actually be serious about making sure we look after those that have given so much to the province, our seniors. We've got to look at that.
Ms. Barley?
We have to manage things so much better. And a simple example is at-home care. We are one of the provinces in Canada that invests the least amount in at-home care, when in the end we know that people, if they have a choice, they would rather receive care at home as opposed to in the hospital or in a nursing home. And guess what? It's so much cheaper. So why are we not doing that? We've known this since the 1990s because we knew that our aging population was coming. And so we've studied the issue. But why are we not really truly addressing this and essentially managing it better? It's a win-win.
Okay, moving to the next question from Chris Morris for Blaine Higgs.
Hi, Blaine. So the net debt in New Brunswick is $14 billion now and growing. We've had a deficit for 8 straight years. How would you eliminate the deficit, and how quickly could you eliminate it?
We were on a very solid path of eliminating the deficit. We had reduced it by $450 million. It started out at $830. We ended up at $377. It went back up with the arrival of this government. We had no plans for the HST. We didn't need it. We would have been within $100 million right now of balancing the budget without the HST. The new spending at every election is what kills us. $300, $400 million, as we promise things to get elected. I will not be doing that. If we're going to fix this province, we get on a continuous path of performance. I met with this government. I went through everything we had, said, here's a program. And I would challenge anyone to look at the facts. You're not going to bounce it overnight. You're not going to come up with some dream, it shall be done. You're going to have a long, sustainable plan to get there. And that was the plan I was on. That was the plan that would have balanced the books and been the first province to basically do it without the HST. And how it was being done was people in the system were engaged in the solutions. Every employee was looking for ways to do our services better, and it was fun. It was challenging and rewarding.
Mr. McDonald?
You know, I agree with Blaine on this completely, and I think that the thing about a continuous improvement process is that it's continuous. You need to keep constant pressure on your spending. There's no doubt about that. But the other thing is we need to grow. This province, relative to the rest of the world, is actually standing still or shrinking. So we need to grow this province. And I think we do that by growing our economy. As I said at the beginning, we need to help New Brunswick businesses grow. We need to take the burden that we've put on them off in terms of taxation and red tape. We need to make sure that they can get their goods to market, and we need to make sure that when they get there, they're the right goods. And by doing that, the economy will grow. We also have to return some of that taxation to customers, because customers are what drives the economy. And we have to make sure that families have the quality of life they deserve, and if they do that, if we can give that to them, the economy will grow.
Mr. Stewart?
We have to stop throwing large sums of corporate training grants and corporate welfare to companies that don't need it. And that's continuous, and it's successive governments that have been doing this. We have to take a good look at that and stop doing it, because the return isn't there. Many of these companies leave when the money dries up, and then your government's put back over the barrel to fill their hand again, only to cut a ribbon or to see the company out of the province. We also have to look at our bloated economic development bureaucracy, which is failing. And I think it's in large part too because of government as well, because we're asking civil servants to qualify between losing endeavors. An example, $30 million on the Algonquin Hotel. What does that say to every other hotel, even though I think it's a beautiful hotel? Look at Carricket Shipyard. The largest company wouldn't purchase it for $1, but the tax-paying citizens of our province are going to pay $40 million that we know of. We need to stop throwing corporate subsidies at the large-scale businesses and start working in the best interest of New Brunswick citizens.
Mr. Norton?
Well, the very first thing, and this ties into Blaine's point, is we need to make it a priority. Chris has mentioned the number $14 billion, and about 1.5 of that's been added in the last 2 years of this current government. As far as the current government's concerned, there is no light at the end of the tunnel for New Brunswick. And so a progressive conservative government needs to set the light at the end of the tunnel and put in place that plan. Yes, we absolutely, and this goes to Brian's point, start growing the economy. We've been stagnating in New Brunswick, in part because we haven't bothered talking about what actually drives this province in the biggest ways, our industrial and our manufacturing and our export potential.
Ms. Barley?
We don't have currently a revenue problem. Yes, it could be better. Yes, we must work to make it better, but what we currently have is a spending problem. And when we look at how we spend money, it is clear that we are making bad decisions. And we seem to have gotten into a practice of managing it in the same old way in the past number of years that is clearly not working. We have to do economic development completely different because the economy is not growing. It's not working. We've created Opportunities New Brunswick that employs over 100 employees, that has an annual budget of $100 million. And what is it doing for us concretely? We can't continue to manage money, taxpayers' money, in that way. It's simply not working. We have to do much better.
Mr. Dubé?
You know, everybody's going to agree tonight with this statement. You know, we got to manage better our government. You know, and to do that, you need somebody at the helm, as leader, that understands management, understands government, understands the process. We need to make the right changes to correct where we're at and where we're going. We need to reduce the spending. Of course we need to reduce the spending. We need to create some growth in New Brunswick. But we need to also introduce new technologies. I was going to go on healthcare earlier with new technologies, as you know, a computerized physician order entry. If somebody ever heard about that, but it will eliminate duplication of services and where somebody receives a treatment or a radiology. It's there. It's on the system. So the patient goes in. You reduce that cost. But we have to be smart. We have to be a smart government if we're going to get this thing done. But it's creating growth, reducing spending, and being smart.
Mr. Allen?
Yes, and it's a huge issue because just the extra debt that we've racked up in the last couple of years at historically low interest rates means roughly an extra $300 to every working person in New Brunswick out of their pocket. And if we have a 1% increase in rates, that's going to take another $100. So families are really feeling this pinch in their pockets because of taxes. I think we can all agree on the things we need to make government more efficient, but I think we need to look at it even more fundamentally than that. You can make processes in government efficient, or you can try to, but the bottom line is you should be concerned about what government should and should not be doing. Should government be running call centers? We got a great call center industry in New Brunswick. Why are we running 74 and now 4 call centers? Why are retailing wine and beer? Why are we running information systems when great companies around the world can run that? Let's decide what government should and shouldn't be doing, as opposed to making something efficient that we even shouldn't be doing.
So we have 2.5 minutes for open discussion on fighting the debt. Who'd like to go first? Mr. Norton?
I'll just tie into something that Mike has mentioned, and it's a really good question. What should we and should we not be doing? You take the recent decision by the Premier, essentially on the fly, in Charlotte County on New Brunswick Day, to set policy on the back of a napkin. I mean, that's when he has capable people that are in that healthcare authority to give advice on how to best deliver service most efficiently. Those are the people we need to listen to in New Brunswick, not to make policy on the fly, as it were, not listen to the experts in the field.
Governments must be held accountable to achieve results, and they need help to do this. That's why the Accountability Act was in place, in order to cause that sort of visibility into what was happening. We need help from the media to look at what was really trending in the right direction, what wasn't, and be critical of that. Be more than critical, be factual about whether it was moving in the direction or not. Spending had gone from 6% to 1.5% and holding at 1.5%, about the rate of inflation. The programs get disrupted every new government. That is what's killing us. Politics, invented on the fly, as mentioned earlier, politics, spending money to get by votes, is putting us deeper and deeper into debt. And we see it every election. So when do we face that reality and basically look at people in the eye and say, what, are you promising something else? Rather than, how are we going to fix New Brunswick? It's there to be done. I've seen it firsthand.
Mr. Stewart?
It's interesting that Mel has mentioned the Charlotte County Hospital. I put a press release out on that today. That's one of the most poorest governance models I've ever seen from a sitting government. So that's just another example of how the current government does everything behind their people's backs. And here's how you fix that. An independent ethics commission with a lobby registry to hold the companies accountable, the recall legislation to hold the MLAs accountable, and the full disclosure of all the public contracts and deals so that there are quarterly results and no secret deals on the backs of the taxpayers.
Ms. Barley?
I agree with my colleague, Mr. Higgs, that we have to stop making promises. As politicians, it seems that, some of them have gone into making promises in every single place that you go. And that's essentially part of the reason why we are in this situation. Unfortunately, Mr. Higgs also says, however, that, we have to stop, take the politics out of it and make a continuous plan, and that doesn't change with a changing government. But that's not reality. Of course, as soon as there's a change in government, that is going to happen. And we can't stop changing government. That's also a political reality. So we have to be very serious and honest about what we can actually achieve here.
10 seconds, Mr. Dubé, before we go to the next question.
Progressive Conservative government was on target to balance the budget without raising taxes up to 15% on GST. The best thing we can do right now, the best thing we can do is win the next election. The Liberal government has added, hundreds of millions of dollars to the debt. We need to take control of this government, and we need to take control of it very fast.
Okay, last question from John for Brian McDonald.
Brian Gallant's government recently introduced free tuition to boost enrollment. How would you boost enrollment for colleges and universities?
Well, it's interesting that we call it free tuition because it's not free to the people who have lost the benefits in order to create this program. So the first thing we need to do is, I think, really reevaluate how we fund and how we support access to education in this province. I think any program that we have, the first thing it does need to do is help people that need access. There's people out there that can't afford post-secondary education, and they need to have access to it. So there needs to be some sort of bursary program to meet that need. We should also reward those people that do a good job, that work hard. So there should be a timely completion element to it, and I think there should be a reward system for scholarships and that sort of thing to reward good students. And the other thing we need to do is retain students. You know, we've said we need to grow. We said we need good minds to fuel our economy. In order to do that, we've got to keep the New Brunswickers that we're paying to educate, we've got to keep them here. And families want their children and their grandchildren to stay here in the province. And so in order to do that, we should have an incentive program as part of this, but we also need to grow the economy.
You're talking about bolstering the enrollment numbers. That's best started in the school system. We need to start focusing on critical thinking, team-based execution, and coding, as well as math, science, and English and French, of course. But I think looking at that question, the real question is, how do the universities and colleges get results? Are they going to market to find out where are the jobs right now in New Brunswick? What should we be training these individuals in? Is that happening? By bolstering enrollment, just by giving somebody a big break on tuition, it still comes back to the question, are we getting the value from this education? Are they sending people out to a market where there's actually employment opportunities? So as far as the tuition program they put in, when you give a hand up to those in the lowest socioeconomic situations, the basis of that, I agree with. But the program has many holes in it, and that's not the best method to bolster enrollment.
Mr. Norton?
Well, the premise of the question is about boosting enrollment, but that's not the purpose of the tuition access bursary. It's access, just as the name suggests, especially for those who can't afford it. And I support that. But what I don't support is a government that has cut support for students in this province from about 50 million to 25 million. That's done away with a program that gave recent graduates a chance to put a down payment on a home and build a life in New Brunswick, and a program that incented students to come back to New Brunswick and build a career. We need to have the best of both. Access, yes, and to Jake's point, certainly making sure we have graduates going into the post-secondary world that have the necessary skill sets, but also programs that incent students to come and stay in New Brunswick.
Ms. Barley?
I have to agree with my colleague, Mr. Norton, because if the sole objective was really to increase access to post-secondary education, then it would not discriminate against the private colleges and university. And also, it wouldn't have decreased the amount of funding that was available to students. It would have provided this government would have provided the same amount of funding, but would have perhaps have decided to provide free tuition to a greater number of students. What we saw was the total opposite. There was a lot of students who benefited from the previous programs. I think it was approximately 40,000 students, and now it's only approximately 7,000 students who actually benefit from this free tuition. So if we're really talking about access, it's actually not true. And that's the main issue. People have lost confidence in the political process because they can't trust what their own government is telling them. They can't trust that when someone makes an announcement to call it a historic moment in New Brunswick, that it truly is a historic moment in New Brunswick and not something that we're trying to pretend that it's not.
Mr. Dubé?
I agree with all my colleagues. It's about accessibility to post-secondary education. We have to make sure, as a government, that we give our all to our kids, that we give our all and encourage our children to follow post-secondary education. We need to empower them, but we don't have to be cutting back on other programs that we're working as well. We could marry both together, all right, and make sure that everybody, every New Brunswicker, every child here in this province has access to quality post-secondary education. But we also have to engage the private sector as well to make sure that when our children get out of post-secondary education, they're job ready. And that's lacking, and more should be done on that front.
Mr. Allen?
Yeah, it's kind of one of those, a historic announcement, and then the next day it's, oh, wait a minute, doesn't apply to 60,000 income earners, $60,000. Oh, wait a minute, doesn't apply to private colleges. Oh, wait a minute, no, they're going to remove the tuition rebate, which I signed up for. There was no accountability in this new program for performance on the students going to school, and no accountability to the universities, to Jake's point, in terms of offering programs that are actually going to keep people employable. Historic? Well, maybe, but effective? No. I think we'd be much better off to have put the tuition rebate back in, because I get very concerned about any time you take away something and don't grandfather people on an existing program. And the second thing, much better off with a forgivable loan, where if a person takes a program, even outside to take agricultural college in Nova Scotia, comes back, works in New Brunswick for 5 years, forgive the loan. If they go away and work in Fort McMurray, it becomes repayable.
Mr. Higgs?
So is that our goal, to increase enrollment in the universities? And so if you get to the root cause of why is enrollment down? When I asked private universities and colleges, what's your enrollment look like prior to this program, they said it's been increasing about 15% a year. And when I asked why is that, they said, well, we match up very closely our curriculum with the actual market. So when people come in, they know their graduates have a high success rate of employment. So it depends what you're coming to the university for. However, what does free education accomplish? Every student should have access to money to go to university and meet the requirements to stay in university and get the loan to do that. But why does it need to be free? And when you do it as free on the backs of people that are trying to pay their way, trying to stay in the province and find an incentive to do so, there's nothing free about that. That's just transferring one issue from a problem we're not prepared to address to somebody else. That was another policy born on the fly, no depth whatsoever, and just, oh, this will work for today's headline.
2.5 minutes for open discussion on post-secondary education. Mr. McDonald?
One of my concerns is that one of the biggest exports that New Brunswick provides is our great minds. You know, we take our youth here, we educate them, try and make them bilingual, give them a trade or send them to university, and then they have to leave this province to work. We need to build a New Brunswick where those people can live here, work here, build their lives and their homes and their families, and build this province. That's what we need, and we've seen too much of it. And in order to do that, I believe we've got to double down on New Brunswick businesses. We've got to make sure that our businesses are competitive, they can get to world markets, and they have the right products when they get there. And that's the way we're going to build an economy that doesn't just give people jobs, but gives them careers and a livelihood and a future here in New Brunswick.
Mr. Norton?
Brian's right, and that's why Monica's earlier point about making sure we have access, especially to the private colleges and universities in the province, is so important. Not every student wants to go off to a 4-year post-secondary degree program. There are many private colleges and universities that offer exceptional training, and as a result, great workforce opportunity.
Mr. Howell?
I'll use an example to reinforce that. You look at East Coast Trades College in Fredericton. When this program was announced, they immediately lost over $100,000 in tuition of people that were actually coming to their school. This is a school that actually works with the private sector to get people, not only you train them, but you put them out, and they have a 90% success rate in their placement. This is a program that really actually destroyed that kind of school.
Ms. Barley?
And that's what was so disturbing about this government, because in that decision, if their first priority was the economy, as they've said that it was, and if their first priority was job creation, why would they have not tied that decision to, in some way, to that? I agree with Brian that our biggest exporter is our children, our workforce. There are so many people leaving this province because they feel they have no opportunity here in New Brunswick. And with our educational institutions, we have a clear opportunity to create opportunity. We have to match those up.
Mr. Stewart?
The tuition rebate program should be reinstated because it was a major slap in the face to those kids that are just starting to graduate from university programs. And the second part of that is the universities and colleges can learn a lot from the private colleges who are telling they're going to market to find out where the employment exists to be. So that's important for the future.
Mr. Higgs, 10 seconds.
Who is protecting the working class? Who's protecting those parents that are out there working day and night, paying their tuition, looking for a tax credit, but doing whatever they can in order to show their kids can go to university and go to higher learning? Who is protecting that group that we want to be the next entrepreneurs, the next people that keep our kids here? Not exporting them somewhere else, but keep them here so they can innovate right in this province.
We now move to closing statements. Each of you will have 1 minute, and we start with Jake Stewart.
Ladies and gentlemen, every once in a while, somebody comes along that challenges the status quo. We all say we want this, but we don't often vote for it. This is your chance. The benefit of that is I'm a sitting MLA, so I have experience now. The second part of that is I'm in a mainstream political party where real change can happen. I'm the person you should vote for because I will provide a response and a plan of action to the most significant problems we've been facing in our province. I'm that person. What is this? It's ethics, economy, and equality that I care about, and it's common sense for the common good for one New Brunswick. I need your support. Thank you.
Mr. Norton.
Thank you very much again, JP, to you and the panelists and all of my fellow colleagues and the viewers at home. I've had the very good fortune of living around New Brunswick in a number of communities, from Graminan Island to summers along the St. John River and near the Perth Andover River Valley as well. And we have an incredible province, but as we've talked about tonight, there is no point in having a beautiful province if no one is here to enjoy it. So we need to focus on the economy. We need to focus on jobs and controlling our spending. And I've had the very good fortune of leading a community at the municipal level where we've solved a bankrupt pension crisis, built the largest infrastructure project in the history of any community, and meanwhile invested record amounts in infrastructure that's so important to everyday people, roads and recreation. I very respectfully ask for the support of everyone on October 22nd. Thank you very much.
Ms. Barley?
Thank you. Now is the time for you to choose a leader. And a leader is not necessarily someone who has political experience, because political experience does not equate necessarily with leadership skills. I, as a federal crown prosecutor, dealt with real issues, got real results. I've been a lawyer for 15 years. I've represented and fought for people, corporations, governments, municipalities across the province, and every single day. What we need is someone that's going to take action, that's going to do it, that's going to fix it once and for all, because we can't continue doing as we've done. The same old will not work, and we have to stop talking and act. I ask for your support and your vote on October 22nd. Thank you.
Mr. Dubé?
First of all, I'd like to thank my colleagues as well this evening, and the Telegraph Journal, our moderators, for keeping us on board, and Rogers as well for bringing us into people's homes tonight. You have an important choice to make October 22nd. You have to choose the next leader of the Progressive Conservative Party of New Brunswick, who could possibly become the next Premier of New Brunswick. In this, we need to make sure that when we choose the next leader, this leader has experience. This leader is able to communicate in every single part of our province and listen to the people of New Brunswick, and make sure that this person has the leadership and the vision to move our province forward. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the experience. I'm able to communicate in every part of this province. I'm fluently bilingual, and I have a vision for a strong and prosperous New Brunswick. Ladies and gentlemen, I humbly ask for your support on October 22nd. Thank you.
Mr. Allen?
Thanks to Rogers and the Telegraph Journal and all my colleagues for being here. It's been a great exchange. Why Mike? The challenges we face as a province are complex, and to deal with that complexity, I believe our next leader must have experience. Our next leader must be business-minded and financially astute. I also believe our next leader must be collaborative and recognize that MLAs are elected by their constituents to represent them and not the Premier back to their ridings. Our next leader must be electable. I've had the opportunity and the great honor to be elected as a Member of Parliament for Tobique-Mactaquac 3 times. And before entering political life, I was in the public and private business sector for 23 years. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm ready to be your leader. I'm ready to form a government, a thoughtful, common sense government that's respectful, bold, and fair. On October the 22nd, I respectfully ask for your support.
Mr. Higgs?
This time it's not a gamble. I've been in the private sector for over 30 years. I've been in government in senior roles for 4 years, and I've been in opposition for 2 years. I have seen the opportunities in this province. I've seen how real they can be. So this time, you're voting for someone with experience that I've heard many people talk about tonight, and it's real experience. It's experience in government, and I've seen the opportunities. I don't need a 2-year training probationary period. I can start and hit the ground running. We talked about the pension reform, and Mr. Norton referred to that often. And yes, we were proud to be part of that, proud to change it in our province and let the municipalities have the same opportunity, because it was real reform to protect pensions. I have the experience. I believe in accountability, a cornerstone of what I believe in. We have people in the system willing to be engaged. I built leaders. I've engaged people in getting results for years. It's teamwork. It's sustainable. I can make it happen. I'm sure of it. The Premier's office shouldn't be a training center. I cannot and I will not be able to do it in finance. That's why I'm running for Premier of this province.
Mr. MacDonald?
I believe in New Brunswick, And you're still watching because you believe in New Brunswick. This province has incredible potential. We can build a province where we help New Brunswick businesses so that those businesses can create jobs here so families can build their lives here in New Brunswick. I want to see a province where taxes are lower so those families can afford the quality of life they deserve. I want to see a province where we help those who need it the most, and a province that respects those that help build it, our seniors, our first responders, our veterans, and our entrepreneurs. That's what we can have together, but I need your help. Please give me your support, and together we can build a better New Brunswick.
On behalf of Rogers TV and the Telegraph Journal, I want to thank you at home for watching. I want to thank the audience here at École Sainte-Anne. Thank John Chillibeck and Chris Morris from the Telegraph Journal for their great questions. And of course, thank all the candidates. Again, Jake Stewart, Mel Norton, Monica Barley, Jean Dubé, Mike Allen, Blaine Higgs, and Brian McDonald. After some of the debates we've watched south of the border, it's wonderful to have a debate with substance, civility, and it looks like things might be okay. But thanks a lot, and remember to vote in this contest. You need to become a member of the Progressive Conservatives, and the convention is October 22nd. Thank you, and have a great night.